Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Over the past 24 hours, U.S. officials confirmed that Washington and Kiev have effectively finalized security guarantees for Ukraine. This isn't a dramatic signing ceremony moment, but it is a shift from frameworks being discussed to something closer to a settled concept. The structure hasn't changed much from what we've been hearing. A limited European troop presence, primarily British and French, inside Ukraine after a ceasefire, with a U.S. backstop making it credible. The update isn't the idea itself, it's the firmness. This has gone from theoretical to actionable in U.S. government language. And that matters because Moscow immediately reacted as if it crossed a red line. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov came out swinging again, rejecting Western security guarantees outright and recycling the same Istanbul-era demands we've been hearing since 2022. Ukraine gets disarmed, Russia gets veto power, and somehow we're all supposed to call that peace. Lavrov also doubled down on Putin's June 2024 position. Ukraine and NATO must capitulate to Russia's original war aims. No softening, no trial balloons. If anything, the tone has hardened since earlier this week. What's notable here is how aligned the Russian messaging has been across the system. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov reiterated that Russia shouldn't be negotiating at all and should just keep fighting. Lawmakers echoed that line. This isn't freelancing, it's coordinated. The Kremlin is not preparing its domestic audience for compromise. It's reinforcing the idea that negotiations are tactical, not transformational. Now, let's talk about the thing that grabbed all the headlines: the short-term pause on Russian strikes. On Thursday, President Trump said he personally asked Vladimir Putin to pause strikes on Kiev and other cities for a week because of extreme cold, and that Putin agreed. Since then, the picture has become clearer, but also messier. Ukraine didn't confirm a formal ceasefire. President Zelensky thanked the U.S. for its efforts, but was careful not to overstate what's actually in place. The Kremlin acknowledged Trump made the request, but very deliberately avoided saying yes or no. Russian military bloggers then filled in the gap, claiming an internal order went out, halting long-range strikes for several days, possibly into early February. And sure enough, while Russia launched another large drone wave overnight, there were no confirmed hits on energy infrastructure. So what's the update compared to what we heard yesterday? The pause appears to be real, but narrow, informal, and fragile. No paperwork, no enforcement mechanism, no acknowledgement that Ukraine deserves protection. This looks less like a ceasefire and more like a Kremlin smoke break, useful for optics, easy to reverse. And Russia made its position crystal clear right alongside this. Anything longer than a very short pause is unacceptable. Lavrov explicitly said a longer ceasefire would allow Ukraine to rest and rearm. That tells you Moscow still believes time is working in its favor. While all of that plays out at the diplomatic level, the battlefield reality hasn't slowed. We talked yesterday about Russia maintaining pressure across the front, and the update here is where that pressure is being applied. Reporting out of southeastern Ukraine shows Russia exploiting thinner Ukrainian defenses in sectors Kiev hasn't prioritized politically. Around Huliaipol, Russian units infiltrated under fog late last month, overran a Ukrainian command post, and captured equipment that exposed nearby drone operators. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough, but it didn't need to be. Ukrainian commanders have been blunt about what this reflects. Ukraine simply cannot defend every mile of a roughly 700-mile front equally. Elite units are being rushed from one hotspot to another, containing flare-ups rather than locking down terrain. Some battalions are operating at a fraction of authorized strength. Draft evasion, exhaustion, and 3+ years of attrition are showing up in force generation. Russia's territorial gains remain limited, but they're happening in places that matter for leverage, not headlines. One area where Russia has adapted quickly is technology. We mentioned drones yesterday, and the update here is the range and sophistication. Russian forces are now routinely using cheap, fixed-wing FPV drones capable of flying dozens of miles behind the front, targeting Ukrainian logistics routes well away from the fighting. Some of these drones are being guided using satellite terminals, including Starlink systems. Ukraine has confirmed it's now working directly with SpaceX to shut that down. That's not a small escalation. It's a sign of how deeply civilian tech is embedded in modern warfare. Russia, meanwhile, has formally labeled Starlink, Gmail, and Western cloud services as national security threats in a draft doctrine. That's Moscow saying the quiet part out loud. If they don't control the information layer, they see it as hostile. On the economic front, there's a meaningful update too. Lukoil, one of Russia's biggest energy companies and historically one of its most internationally connected, is now negotiating to sell most of its foreign assets, including U.S. operations. This follows U.S. sanctions imposed back in October that froze assets and disrupted banking. The downstream effects have been ugly. Hundreds of U.S.-based gas station owners suddenly couldn't process credit cards or receive payments. Treasury issued limited waivers, but the damage lingered. The update here isn't that sanctions hurt. That's old news. It's that they're now forcing Russia to unwind parts of its global footprint. Lukoil's overseas presence wasn't just about revenue. It was about influence and insulation. Losing that narrows Moscow's options at a bad moment. Zooming out beyond Ukraine, Russia continues to apply pressure in the gray zone. Late this week, dozens of balloons launched from Belarus crossed into Lithuanian and Polish airspace, forcing airport shutdowns and military responses. Some were carrying smuggled cargo. This fits a pattern we've talked about before. Low-level, deniable pressure designed to irritate, probe, and normalize instability. Belarus, increasingly indistinguishable from Russia's military planning apparatus, also announced new border outposts and a training ground near Ukraine. None of this is random. Inside Russia, the state is tightening control further. The Defense Ministry is recruiting drone operators directly from universities, offering big money while pressuring students with threats of expulsion and debt. At the same time, the Kremlin continues folding semi-autonomous armed groups fully under state control after learning the hard way with Wagner that charismatic warlords are bad for regime survival. There's also growing strain around veterans returning from Ukraine, particularly in the North Caucasus, where land grants and unemployment are stoking ethnic tension. History tells us that's a volatile mix, and Moscow knows it. So when you put all of this together, the update from yesterday is less about new directions and more about sharper edges. Security guarantees are firmer. Russia's rejection is louder. The energy pause is narrower than it first appeared. Battlefield pressure continues, just applied more selectively. Sanctions are forcing real economic decisions, and hybrid activity remains very much alive. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.